So kind of went in the day, slated to pick twice, so kind of just repositioned ourselves there a little bit and ended up picking two players. So the trades were probably just more maneuvering more than anything else, just trying to do what we felt made sense, what was best. The trade there for Juice just kind of moved a few slots there. I think we felt it was something that made sense as we were kind of working through that round. He's a player that our staff really liked. Multi-position players, played center, more center than guard, but has some position flexibility on the interior. Great kid. I mean, you'll learn about his story, but had dealt with some adversity there early on in his life. Really worked his ass off to kind of get to the point where he could actually go out there and be, a good, productive player. Good program. He participated, I want to say he was at the East-West. He had a good week there. Was a player that we spent a decent amount of time with here during the course of the spring. So great attitude, great kid, great story. Gives us some flexibility there on the interior, the offensive line. So added into the mix, and then try to keep our string going here of trying to add as many local flavors to the roster as possible. But and everybody's seen Tank play, and he's kind of seen Tank and talked to Tank and kind of know his story. Look, I would say, what he's accomplished and overcome to get to this point, is incredible and really speaks to who he is as a person more than a football player. Had him in our building. He just has an engaging personality, and there's a lot of depth to him. And he's a real kid who cares a lot about football. Look, he's small. Okay, you can't change. It's kind of like what Bryce said. He's 5'10", you can't change your size, but you figure out a way to be productive and be a good football player. And Tank's been as productive as any, I would say, offensive skill player in the country over the last 2 years. Went down to the Senior Bowl, and frankly, nobody covered him. So he's small. He's small, but I would say good football players come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, and say he's proof positive of that. So I think he's a player that brings an element, to the team and to the offense from an explosive standpoint, that, there's potentially an opportunity there to enhance some of the things that we do. So between offensively and, maybe a role as a returner, the ball handling. So I think that's something that we'll see if he can do. But he's an awesome kid. I would say these four kids that we've selected at this point, and you had an opportunity to listen to Will and CJ today. It's really emblematic of the type of people that we want to have in this building. So when you put together who they are as men and whatever their skill level is on a football field, so you tie it all together, it's kind of how we want to build a program, because in the end, that's how you sustain something over long periods of time. So try to avoid the ebbs and flows and just try to keep it moving in the right direction. Say those four players over the last couple of days, they have a lot of depth. They're great human beings. They're good football players. They want to compete. D'Amico's talked about that. You mentioned, you kind of mentioned that a couple of different occasions. So it's about consistent, diligent effort. It's about competition. It's about willingness to get better and want to get better and just want to be the best version of themselves. So I would say Juice and Tank are certainly emblematic of that as well. So I have a couple picks there at the top of the fourth round tomorrow, so 104 and 105. So we'll be ready to go early. Probably get some calls on those picks. Some teams will probably want to move up here a little bit, so we'll look at it. I think really what we have to do is weigh how far to go back and at the cost of how many players we might lose. So, but we'll look at that tonight. We definitely have, I'd say 8 to 10 players there that we've sort of earmarked. We'll meet as a staff tomorrow morning, meet as a coaching staff, kind of recalibrate. Here's where we're at. Here's where we're at in the roster. Here's our opportunities. And just try to keep adding good football players to the team. So we have the 2 fourths, a handful of thirds, and I think that's 7th there, somewhere in there. So 6 as we sit here today. So I'd say more than anything tomorrow, it'll probably be more about repositioning than just trying to do a trade to get some draft capital. It's really not about that. So that's how we'll approach it. Try to get a good night's sleep here tonight, come in the morning, kind of get ready to go, and be ready to go there early. Chicago will pick, and then we're on the clock. So everybody's, I think, looking forward to the opportunity to continue to build the team. So that takes some questions. Yeah, Christy, go ahead.
When you have a guy like Tank, who, like you said, is small, do you feel like it adds maybe an edge that helps you maybe be successful at this level?
Yeah, it's actually a great question. I would say players like that, and or when you see players who are going to be picked here on the third day. So, they're inherently maybe a little bit more of a chip, whether or not they thought they should have went earlier or not. So, you can't change your size, so whatever you are. but what you can do is maximize what you have as an individual and as a player. So I think Tank takes a lot of pride in who he is, what he's about, what he's overcome, and I think he views himself as a football player. So, I've had the good fortune of being around a lot of really good football players that maybe weren't the biggest players. So guys like Danny Woodhead, guys like Kevin Falk. I mean, you guys, I'd say, know Wes Welker as well. So Wes is one of the most productive receivers, in football for a period of time there. And he's a slot receiver. He'll probably get pissed off if you say he's a slot receiver. But nonetheless, Wes was 5'7", 175 pounds, wasn't drafted. Danny Amendola wasn't drafted. So I think each player is going to be motivated differently, and you can't change the circumstance. What you can do is try to make the most of what you have, and I think Tank's tried to do that here to this point, and his mindset probably won't change here, once he walks in our building.
And did him being in town and being able to, I don't know, have him right down the street, did that help?
I don't know if it helped. We had a lot of exposures to him, so we saw him play a bunch of times. Our area scout was over there, Lip was over there, Tom Hayden was over there. I wandered over there a few times. So, Houston's done a good job. Dana's done a good job with the program. They've produced some players here over the last few years. So, Tank sort of fits the profile, and they've got some other players here that'll probably show up over the next, day or so that are going to end up on teams. So, I don't think it, helped. Other than, he's close, but wherever he was, we probably would have found him regardless. Aaron, go ahead. Yeah, I think Senior Bowl is always a good measure of competition because the Senior Bowl, Jim does a great job. They usually get the best players, so you're seeing kind of good on good. And when you get to see a one-on-one or an individual drill, I'd say not a lot of colleges do one-on-one, say pass coverage, route running and pass coverage. And then we're able to do it kind of in that environment. It's another opportunity to evaluate the player. Maybe there's some nuance or something different that you see, or maybe you didn't necessarily, not that Houston doesn't do it, but maybe there's something a little bit different. And I would say, speaking to the individual workout, I'd say with returners, a lot of special teams coaches, there's certain drills that they want to see a player perform and do different things with them, and that's part of the evaluation. So I would say being a returner is very nuanced. And even if you haven't done it, it can be trained or something that can be taught and something that can be learned. So a lot of it is positioning, setup, ball placement, seeing the flight of the ball, seeing the ball off the foot of the punter, the spin, and where it's headed. So there's might be some things that you want to drill or see. And it's not the reason that you're drafting the player, but you're trying to project them into a role, and if you think it's offense to potentially returner, all right, do we think he's capable of handling that role? So, we think he is, but we'll find out a little bit more, when we get here. So, but anytime you have an opportunity to do something kind of on a one-on-one basis, it certainly helps with the evaluation.
In drafting Scruggs, just the overview of addressing the offensive line since the moment you got here, what was kind of, it seems like a pretty long game to get things to this point. Could you talk about that in its entirety, kind of how you've done that and how Scruggs fit into this and what's left to solidify the position improvements needed in here?
Yeah, I wouldn't say anything specific. I think it's just you evaluate your team, you evaluate where the club is, you evaluate who's under contract, who's going to be here, what are our opportunities to add. So, this year's line is going to look different than last year's line, and next year's line could look a little bit different. So it's really, I would say, consistent with the theme of just trying to add good football players to the team. I wouldn't say it's anything in particular. I'd say Juice is a player that I'd say Chris and Cole identified as somebody that they thought fit what we were trying to do. So then, we evaluate the player, we grade him, we put a value on it, and then just add him to the mix. So the competition is going to sort itself out about how he fits. So I would say in his particular case has some flexibility, so probably more than just a center. So I'd say, Mace and Kenyon are really guard onlys. So, and then Quiz is kind of more center than guard. Dieter's somebody that has some experience playing multiple spots. But when you look at the offensive line, you're going to have 5 starters, and then 6 and 7. One of them is going to be your next tackle and be able to swing, and then one of them is going to be your next inside player because during the course, you could take 8 to the game. The 8's just kind of an extra guy, but you want somebody, whoever the starter is, you have the center and the 2 guards. All right, the next player in the game, do you have to move the guard to center, or do you bring another player in to play center so you don't displace the guards? So when you're looking at overall positional value and what they provide, and that's part of the evaluation. So I think in Juice's case, it's probably a little more center than guard, but if he had to go over there and play guard, it looks like he would be competitive. So other than having your hand on the ball, it's some of the same things that are going to go on the inside. So the more you can maybe identify guys and maybe have 3 position inside versatility, it's going to enhance the overall value of that group, and in turn going to enhance the overall value of the team.
So with day 3 picks coming up, what's the balance between taking more of a risk on a guy that fits a better athletic profile versus a guy that appears to be a good football player but might be limited in terms of athleticism?
Yeah, we're going to stay true to our formula. So evaluate the player, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what's the grade, what's the role. They have a role in the kicking game, they have a role on offense, they have a role on defense. So, I wouldn't say that we're kind of a roll the dice type of mentality. So try to be very thoughtful, sound reasoning behind it, and try to continue to make good, sound decisions. So the same thought process that we've applied the first few days, it's not going to change when we get to 4, 5, 6, and 7. So just try to stay true to your process, try to stay true to our formula, and just continually talk through it and have constructive dialogue, which I would say that was going on today. We probably started talking, I would say, in the 50s. We knew we were at 65. The chances of moving substantially in the second round. So once we got to 50, start to play out some scenarios. What are some opportunities? Okay, if we trade here, here's what it would cost. What's realistic? Where can we get? Who are the players? What are our options? What are some teams maybe doing around us? Not that you know everything, but you're trying to speculate as best you can. So we started talking kind of 48, 49, 50, and then players are coming off the board. And I think at one point we might have had, 6 or 7 trade scenarios up on the board. And not that we had trades in place. It was just, well, here's the cost. Here's a team that might be willing to move. So those are the discussions. So it's very active. It's very collaborative. And it's, pretty lively, but, all trying to get to the same endpoint where pick a player and then move to the next transaction. Because even in that situation, so move from 65 to whatever it was, 62 or whatever the trade was with Philly when we were at 73. And then, all right, we bump back up there to, 69, 70, whatever it was. So just kind of keep it moving. Just kind of like we talked about last night. Each transaction, you go from one to the next. Just keep it moving. And then pick players, and then go from there. Sorry, there he is. Yep.
Today we got a chance to talk with CJ and Will, and when they were interviewing with you, they were in interview mode. They were applying for the job. When we met them today, they already had the job by you all drafted. Did you find out anything different, about them once they were drafted compared to before?
They're the same people. So what they showed y'all today is what they showed us in the building, is what they showed us all throughout the course of the spring. So, and I think you're looking for that consistency in their behavior. Look, they're 2 impressive kids. They're not kids. They're adults, but they're very impressive. And I think the things that they stand for, the things that they're important to them, how they were raised, you saw kind of that on display here today. And they showed that. Will's, I would say, energy and juice when he was here. Again, he was the first visit that we had, and he was the only person that was in the building. And kind of the way we do our visits, I think, is a little bit different, unique, kind of how we set it up. It can be imposing depending on who the player is. And you're just trying to get a gauge of how different people handle different situations. Will was very consistent from the time that he was here in March to the time we talked to him over the course of the spring to the building here today. And the same thing with CJ. So I think more than anything, they probably get a little bit worn out. So you see some strain that they go through, and you have to understand. It's a lot. I think CJ articulated it very well from the time the season is over to this point. What the players have to go through, it's a lot. and you're measuring kind of how they carry themselves, how they handle that situation, and the reality, I mean, it's going to be hard. What they're doing is going to be hard. This league isn't easy. I mean, this league, you're going to probably lose, on average, 7-8 games a year, give or take. That's the way the league is set up. I think the margin of victory this year was 9.3 or whatever it was, which is the closest it's been in however many years. So the margin of error in victory is very small, and it's going to be really, really hard. So you're going to be stressed. You're going to be taxed on a day-to-day basis. So as best we can, we're trying to simulate that and put them in similar circumstances and see how they handle it. And how they acted today, how they handle it today, was the same as how they handled it when they were in our building. And I think that's what you're kind of looking for. If you start to see some discrepancies, then we got to ask ourselves, all right, what do we have? Because ultimately we're just trying to create a profile of what we think we have. And then once they get here, then essentially they're starting over.
Probably got 3 or 4 more guys in a minute. Nick, quick question first. Did you get a sense that teams were interested in Juice, Scruggs, as well as Tank Dell?
Yeah, I would say I don't think those players are like mysteries to teams around the league. So I think Tank was probably pegged in this general vicinity when you look at some of the information that we get. Not specific to teams, but I would say just, we've a lot of information that we look at, probability, pick probability, try to use some of the mock draft information and then see if it's applicable. I mean, you just find some guys, well, they're mocked here, then they go, 50 picks earlier. So, but I'd say both of those players from the discussions we had over the last week, probably we're going to settle in this general vicinity. So we kind of anticipated that. So then it's just a maneuvering how you want to maneuver to have the players. There's probably a player or two that, if we had the opportunity to pick, we'd have liked to have picked today, but can't pick everybody. So, so I think this is, again, these guys aren't mysteries to the league. I think everybody, Tank was at the Senior Bowl, Juice was at the East-West, so, the whole league is there. So, I think these are players that everybody's aware of.
And then you had mentioned yesterday that you felt like, there's some things that you want to see CJ kind of work on. I'm not saying exactly what you said. I'm trying to paraphrase. But what were some things that you ideally would like to see over time?
Yeah, I think the big thing is all players, they have a lot to learn, they have a lot to improve, and what they need to focus on is just getting better individually as a player. So start with your position, start with the skills that are required to play that position, and ultimately the coach is going to work with them to try to work on some of the things that they can improve. So I think it's really more of a general, each player has things that they can work on, and I would say the big thing for all these rookies once they get here is they're not going to be in real good condition because they have a big gap. So it's kind of the pace with which we, operate, the pace with which we train, the pace with which we practice, trying to getting up to speed from that perspective, and then the skills that go along playing that position, like how Gerard and Bobby and Shane and Bill are going to coach quarterback might be different than the way that Ryan and the staff at Ohio State coach quarterback, right? So try to figure out where's the middle ground, but there's some things that go into playing that position that you're going to have to be able to do well. It's the same thing on the offensive line. There's things that Juice is going to do that maybe he hadn't been asked to do at Penn State, or maybe at a certain style. So what are Bobby, Cole, Strauss, what are they going to ask that player to do? So I think that's where the focus is more than anything else. So everybody has something that they can work on, improve on, and get better, including our players, including our returning players. So Nico Collins has plenty of things that he can work on. So Damian Pierce has plenty of things that he can work on, improve, and get better. So that's your job as an NFL player. So what can you do? What can you do to improve your craft, make yourself a better player? That's your responsibility. And if you don't know the answer, then we have resources in the building and people here to help you maybe get better in that area. How you sleep, how you train, your nutrition. I think CJ made a comment about the nutrition staff and Ladd and about the visit here. So the fuel that you put into your body impacts how you recover, impacts your training. So all these things are tied together. So that's where I would say they have a lot to learn just overall, not, well, we're just like playing football. You're playing football, but there's a lot that goes into playing football.
Nick, you alluded to calculus in the case of Juice. He's the third center that's been taken up until that point. Was there something, did somebody sort of give you, did you get some maybe feedback somewhere that somebody might be pushing him to the point that made you want to jump up and maybe spend that extra capital to go after him?
Yeah, I've never been one to say, well, we knew so-and-so was going to pick a player, so we traded in front of them, because I think that's ridiculous. So what I think you have to do is just take the information that you've accumulated and make your best guess about, like, A, where you think the player may go, and just looking at teams that maybe that's a position that we've identified, our pro scouting staff has identified. Again, we don't really know the answers, but that's part of their job and their evaluation to say, look at each team. We actually do the Monday before the draft. We go through each team, all 31, and identify, okay, from our perspective, here's what we perceive as maybe their top 4 or 5 needs, right? Here's what they've done. Here's how they've constructed their team. Here's what they've done in the offseason. Here are some of the things that they've done in the spring, which may lead you to, well, they could potentially this group of players, right? So it's not specific to Juice. It's really specific to, I would say, each team and each player. And then we have to take that information and either you trust the information. Is it accurate? Is it not accurate? So, because you don't want to be like competing against yourself, but I would say by the same token, if you have players that you like and you've identified them and you figure out a way to get them on the team, then it's about positioning yourself accordingly. So that's really more the focus is that, as opposed to, well, we thought so-and-so was going to draft Mr. X, so we traded in front of them. We're not smart enough to figure that out. At least I'm not.
Nick, when you look at the players that you've drafted so far, you mentioned that not only are they good players, but they're also good people. But is there one certain identifying trait that you've noticed in every single one of these players that you're trying to build for the future of this organization identifiably?
Yep, I would say competitiveness, consistency, dependability, competitive stamina, grit, and toughness, and the willingness and the want to get better as a football player. Like, I would say, like, that's what we're looking for. That's what D'Amico has talked about. So, and you can find those players with those traits and characteristics. So they have those traits and characteristics. Then where are they from a physical standpoint, from an athletic skill standpoint relative to their position? So that's part of our job, is try to identify that to the best of our ability. So I think that's the mindset, that's the thought process, that when you walk in this building, you're going to feel that, and you're going to feel the pressure from your teammates around you, and you're going to hold each other accountable and hold them to a high standard. Because in the end, it's about the players. They're going to hold each other to a high standard on a day-to-day basis. And if you have enough people and players with the same mindset, then they're going to trust and respect that the guy next to him is going through the same thing. So if we bring in a player that doesn't have those traits and characteristics and he stands out, like, the players know. Like, players are smart, so they pick up on things. So if he's not a good teammate, he doesn't put the team first, they're going to know. So then it goes back to us, well, why do we bring that player in the building in the first place? So that's our responsibility to the players. That's our responsibility to the coaches. That's our responsibility to the rest of the team. So I'd say it's kind of a nuanced answer, but like going back to those 5-6 attributes at the top, like those are the things I would say that are important. And if you're a Houston Texans football player, when you walk in here, that's what the expectation is, and you know what you're walking into.
Thanks, Nick.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Stay dry.